Mesdames, Messieurs.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Take a seat. We will start very shortly. It will be a 1-hour working session. It will be an interactive working session. I do insist on that because you will be able to take part in the discussions. So we will devote 10 or 15 minutes to a Q&A session. You will be able to express yourself. So there are some people here in the room, and I'd like to say hello to the people who are listening to us and who are watching us behind their computer screens at home across the world. I know that people follow us online for the Aix-en-Provence Rencontres Économiques. So, man and nature, what is the modus vivendi? We have to make sure that human beings and nature coexist, and there are lots of threats on biodiversity. There are lots of players. You have the socio-economic needs and environmental protection, energy transition. So this requires a subtle equilibrium. Before I hand over to Katheline SCHUBERT, an economist, and she prepared this working session very diligently. Katheline SCHUBERT is a professor at the University of Panthéon-Sorbonne, and she's a member of the High Council for Climate. Amongst her different tasks and duties, we have different speakers. Marie-Pierre de Bailliencourt, she is the executive director of the Institut Montaigne, a liberal think tank. Adil NAJAM, the global president of the WWF, the World Fund for Nature, co-author of the 3rd and 4th assessments of the IPCC. Then Arnaud GANGLOFF, the chairman of Kia Partners, a consulting firm in strategy. I think that you are based in 4 countries with 200 employees. And Jean HORNAIN, who is next to me, the chief executive officer of CTO. CTO is a purpose-driven company developing some eco-solutions, eco-packaging solution, eco-recycling solutions. So you do many things. So I will give you 4 minutes, 4 short minutes. Of course, I mean, the stakes are high, so 4 minutes, it might not be enough, but we'll have the opportunity to talk about these different topics, so you can deliver some short introductory remarks. We're going to start with Marie-Pierre de Bailliencourt, the Executive Director of Montaigne Institute, Biodiversity, Economy, Environment, Social, Societal, equilibrium, so it means lots of challenges. So you have 4 minutes. Go ahead. Oh, Kathleen, I haven't fulfilled my objective. So, Kathleen, can you deliver an introduction in order to set the background to our discussions? I forgive you. Don't worry. Regarding my introduction, I'd like to tell you that as part of the development of humankind, we've worked against nature. There are lots of examples to develop ourselves. We trim forests, we killed the big mammals, almost all of them have been killed. So we exploited the non-renewable resources, we exploited the renewable resources on a very large scale. So this is a common thread. And today, we are just wondering whether we can continue along this path regarding biodiversity now. And this is the iconic part of nature. I will mention a few figures, if I can. So regarding biodiversity, the assessment report, the Global Evaluation Report of 2019 shows that the abundance of species on the Earth has diminished since 1900. And there's the Living Planet indicator following the abundance of mammals, reptiles, birds has shown a drop of 70% between 1970 and 2018. So a drop of 70%. I mean, that's huge, colossal 90% in Latin America. So if you consider another example, so there's a red list for the International Union for the Protection of Nature, 150,000 species and 50,000 species are under threat. So it means that it's an unprecedented destructive process. I could talk about the reduction, the curtailment of primary forests. So it's a concerning a disquieting trend that we are witnessing. Why is it of concern? Because from an anthropocentric viewpoint, nature will provide irreplaceable services for humankind. So pollination. In some countries, you have ladies. Most of the time, these are women. They are like cosmonauts, and they will pollinate the trees with their hands. They will do that manually. And it's the perfect example of the services being delivered by nature. So these services could be replaced, but to skyrocketing cost, and other services cannot be replaced. Regarding concrete examples during the COVID pandemic, we've seen to what extent we had to consider the interface between human beings and nature. The link is being curtailed. The animal species, I mean, they have fewer places to live on their own. They are quite close to human beings now. So it is indispensable to keep biodiversity. And clearly, it's not an easy task. So if you consider the current discussions about the current political situation, if you look at the political manifestos of different candidates, they don't talk about this issue. They talk about climate to a certain extent, but they don't talk about nature or biodiversity. The farming crisis that we underwent recently has shown that short-term concerns prevailed over nature concerns or nature-related concerns. So it is extremely important, I mean, to take stock of the seriousness of the situation. There are some economists, they had been worried about the scarcity of fossil fuels. We will be short of oil, we will be short of gas, but it's a different debate now. Then we focused on renewable resources and climate change, and now we are going further. There's a debate about the planet limits. These are the physical limits beyond which humankind can't develop themselves. So these are obstacles to the development of humankind. So you have 9 barriers or 12 barriers or limits. So you have different limitations. Some of them have been overshot. For example, biodiversity. But living species, they are the bedrock of life. Just one word. Please, quickly, imagine what would be a world with men and pets that would give food to human beings. It would be nightmarish. Thank you for talking about that. Thank you for your introduction. So, Marie-Pierre de Bailliencourt, what is your take on the different challenges the Montaigne Institute has talked about? That there's a report. You are not going to unveil the ins and outs. So what is your take on that? Thanks a lot. So as Katheline pointed out, so biodiversity is imbalanced, and of course we need to invest in sustainability. If we want to survive, we need to invest in sustainability through 3 main challenges. First, awareness-raising process. You need to consider economic development and ecological green sustainability. So these concepts, shouldn't be mutually exclusive. They go hand in hand. Then you have to consider biology, biodiversity. These are key elements in terms of value. It is not a new field of constraints, so it's important to value biodiversity, to raise the profile of biodiversity, and then means of action. We need to be pragmatic, efficient, action-oriented. We shouldn't be ideological because you won't achieve your objective. So we need to change tack. We need to look at things in a different way. So the very first change is to move away from a dead angle, from a blind spot, something that I can illustrate. Today, you have more value to exploit immediately, to consume immediately biodiversity instead of investing in biodiversity. I will give you an example. We know the price of a fish, of halibut, but we don't know the value it represents in the maritime ecosystem, in the marine ecosystem, even though it is the first place where you can capture carbon. I would give you another example. We know what is the price of a cubic meter of sludge, but we don't know what is the worth of a forest for plants and fauna and flora. So it's important to value biodiversity, taking into account economic, human types of rationale. There's a second change now that I would like to highlight, the systemic approach, as it were. When we talk about biodiversity or climate, we have a silo-based approach, and climate and biodiversity were in a position, bear witness the development of wind farms and solar panels. There's a competition for the available land for biodiversity purposes. So it is pivotal as part of a management and use of land and resources. It's important to have a systemic approach, and we shouldn't be entrenched in our positions. Third element that is also important, we need to know what people want. When you question populations, 95% of populations will tell you that they are in favor of biodiversity. However, in France, the applications that are downloaded the most shine and tenue. These are fast fashion applications, low or cheap consumption, and if you consider these two apps, they don't pay attention to biodiversity. So we don't want to choose between the water resource in order to produce carbon-free electricity and tap water. We need to move away from these silo-based approaches. How can we do that? We need to trust the economic players. We need a regulatory framework, but above all, we need actions. And today we've realized that companies are ahead of the public authorities. Lots of initiatives were launched. Business for Nature initiative. During the last COP meeting, the companies didn't wait for the regulator in order to take action. That's important because these solutions will be scientific, technological, technical, based on innovation and common progress. So this change means that we need to trust the economic players who will reward the virtuous circle and punish those who cheat. So we'll see what the different players think. Of course, you can step in if you want. During the Q&A session, Adil NAJAM, president of the WWF, this is the Global Fund for Nature. This is a non-governmental organization. Everybody knows that, an international non-governmental organization created in 1961, dedicated to sustainable development and protection for the environment, of the environment. So the question might be broad, but in a nutshell, today. We are all players in nature, so we are a full-fledged species as human beings. So what is your take on the way we can respect one another? We know that nature will respect us, but we need to respect nature. So what is your take on that? And of course, we need to do more, much more than we do.
Thank you very much, and my apologies for not being able to speak in French. I hope my translators will do a better job than me. But thank you for having me here. I'll take your question as, where did we go wrong in terms of our relationship with nature? And
your micro, please.
My short answer is, if I think as the question, where did we go wrong? I think we went wrong in some moment of arrogance when we stopped believing that we are part of nature. At some point, very recently, this is not old, in the last 100 years, we started acting as if nature was other than us. This is why I like this conference. I can see nature, right? I'm not behind concrete walls. I can see the tree. I can feel the heat. But at some point, humans as a species became so arrogant that we thought we were something other than nature, and our job was either to use it, consume it, as a resource, or to protect it as if we were God. And I think our job is both different from both of them. Let me try to explain that with a little story. I know I have a very little time, and I hope the story translates well in French. Supposedly on some other galaxy, in some other planet, there were these two aliens with telescopes looking at the whole universe, trying to find intelligent life. And one of them put their telescope on Earth and said to the other, something very interesting is happening there. And he said, what? He said, these guys have this thing called AI. And they have just developed a system where they can send through AI missiles that are automatic. And so the first one asked, does that mean they are intelligent? He says, no, they're pointing at that themselves. Think about this. There are very few species who spend as much time, whether it is in security, whether it is in economy, whether it is in environment, trying to destroy themselves. We have become not only our own competitors, we have become our own enemies. In some ways, it's like the film character Hulk. Hulk, when he grows big, he tears his own clothes. And at some moment, again, I think in the last 100 years, our power became so big that we didn't realize what we could do, right? Our power was great when we could cut a tree. But now, we can destroy the whole forest without even knowing. Now we can decimate entire rivers. And we are not realizing that what we are doing is really an assault not on nature, but on ourselves. Just one sentence. That is what requires a new economics. That's what requires a new sense of what business does, what we do as business. One last fact, and then I shut up. There is, according to estimates, in the year 2050, which is not very far, in the year 2050, there is likely to be more plastic in the ocean than fish. Think about that. We would have changed the ocean, unless you do your job, which I hope you will, so much that there will be more plastic than fish. That is the question.
Oui, les enjeux sont nombreux. Merci beaucoup. Alors, on va poursuivre. Allez-y, oui, vous pouvez effectivement...
Thank you very much. Yes, you can certainly give a warm round of applause to Adil. We're now going to hear from Arnaud from Kia and Partners, and we're going to hear from a consultant. You work with businesses day to day in helping them to go through these major transitions, environmental transitions, digital transitions, energy transitions, transforming businesses in order to change the world. We know that businesses have very little room for maneuver. There's a lot of international competition, but transforming business to transform the world, is this something that is really possible? Can they really transform themselves in order to change the world? It is a big challenge. Yes, but that's why they're there. It's a good thing. Let me just start with the current affairs. We've been very shocked by French politics recently, but I think we've realized that the French state is going to be less present in the future, either because of the political color of the next regime or because of the high levels of debt. But I think it might be an opportunity for businesses to take on their societal responsibilities by getting more committed to the movements that we're talking about. I'm quite positive about this because the business people that I meet are capable of doing so. We are the leading consultancy firm, mission-focused consultancy firm in France. I know that exists elsewhere in the world. There are a lot of businesses here in the town of Aix-en-Provence, and I work with my partners to very energetically to bring this level of responsibility into businesses. And with respect to today's theme, when we look at the relationship between humans and natures, we cannot avoid talking about businesses. Businesses are at the heart of this relationship. Katheline said that we've caused a lot of damage to nature, and business has played a big role in that. When I say that business is going to play a big role in this transformation, I might be annoying some of you because you may think that we've done a lot of dangerous and damaging things to our planet, and we haven't given ourselves the means to create the change necessary. I want to read out a sentence that I heard from the Indians. When the last tree has been cut down, the last river has been poisoned, only then will we realize that money can't be eaten. We need to keep that in mind. Businesses need to change. And I think that we are at a turning point, a tipping point in our modern economy, and the viewpoints that we can have on this overall business-based economy. We've all become increasingly aware of the value of nature and the value of the resources in our world. The previous speakers have mentioned this. They are limited, they're finite, and for that reason they are very valuable. The second point to say is that we can no longer consider that human beings and businesses are outside of nature. We are within nature. We're part of nature. We need to be aware that all of these changes, businesses have brought us material benefits which we like, we don't want to let go of. So I think the real issue is to rethink our business models and stop putting a business-centered approach in opposition to a society-centered approach. Businesses can work with other stakeholders, but how can we do this? We're going to need to think differently about values of business. This movement requires us to stop thinking about things in terms of EBIT and GDP. We're going to need other measures, other indicators, not to look at value, but values, plural. There are three key things: material value, of course, human value as well, and environmental value. So talking about business, we'll move on to HORNAIN. When we hear all the different speakers, so it sounds like we've got the sword of Damocles hanging over our heads, and that is there an issue around survival today? Yes, even in the title of today's session, we're talking about a modus vivendi, but that's not the right expression. It means living side by side, and there's a conflict. No, that's not right. We're in nature. We're within nature. We need to live in it. And previous speakers spoke about our arrogance, and I agree with what's been said by Adil NAJAM. The idea that we have people on one side and nature on the other. I very much agree with what's been said. My business, Sitio, is a mission-focused business. It's a non-profit business created by social entrepreneurs to recycle household packaging. I'll talk to you a little bit more about that in a moment. The issue that we are discussing today is that our linear economy devours biodiversity, and some of the figures that have been mentioned highlight that. It's clear 50% of world's GDP is based on services that the planet provides free of charge. Our costs are artificially low. we have artificially low costs because we're not taking into account the cost of the planet. That's the simplest way of expressing it. And we're being caught up by that because we're seeing materials crisis, even sand, which we think is infinite. There are 50 million tons that are extracted from the nature, and we're starting to say we might run out of sand. So we need to move from a linear economy to a circular economy. This is a bit of an abstract term, if I'm very honest, but it means something very simple. It means we need to use less resources, we need to use them for longer and not turn our resources into waste. We need to recycle them. This circular economy is very local, it's a collaborative economy, and it brings with it businesses, local communities, scientists, and so my point in all of this is that businesses, as Marie-Pierre said earlier, need to take a role as leaders in this area. Businesses have a leadership role to play in the economic field, but also in society. And they also need to take a role of leadership in the environmental field. You need to be strategic. We need to take a long-term perspective. That's sometimes difficult for businesses, but let's say that a long-term perspective isn't about looking so far ahead. Businesses that don't do this will have a sustainability issue. The costs of acting now are much lower than the costs of future inaction. As Arnaud was saying this, we're running out of public finance. Our political leaders aren't always motivated in this, and I think that business leadership is a real opportunity. Businesses have an opportunity to move away from purely shareholder value towards stakeholder value, where we understand that we're here to serve the ecosystems and the environmental and social fabric that we're part of to ensure that our businesses last and humanity and the environment lasts. We can see our very significant micro and macro issues here. Thank you to all of the speakers for speaking very clearly and within the appropriate times. We're going to now open up the floor to debate things together. We'll talk about some of the solutions. I'm going to just go back to Marie-Pierre de Bailliencourt. Your institute, Institut Montaigne, is thinking about future solutions. You've made some recommendations in a recent report. What is the main recommendation that you would cite, the priority that will have the biggest impact in terms of solutions to the various issues we've heard about? The leading solution is about the way we are organized. We need to organize ourselves on the basis of awareness. It's a fairly simple thing, despite how serious what we've been saying is. I think we have reasons not to despair. We can be an active generation that makes a difference for a very simple reason. Firstly, biodiversity requires global governance, but it's something that can be experienced and put in place locally. Climate has a very long-term path, but biodiversity is something that can be managed over quite a short time period, 3 to 5 year cycles. So there's no reason to despair. We shouldn't say everything is lost. We have the opportunity and the duty to act. So Institut Montaigne has gathered together public and private stakeholders and scientists and researchers, and we've come together to say that if we agree on the definition of public goods, positive and negative things in society, we can agree together locally to have a very pragmatic governance approach that will work. So that's the first element of answer. That's the first solution. Adil NAJAM, I saw you were nodding when Jean HORNAIN was talking. There's a lot of similarity in the things that both of you said. But I'd like to ask you about possible solutions. So what are the key splits that you see between humans as a species and nature? What of these splits do we need to overcome to achieve harmony?
And I totally agree that the answer is not despair. The answer is ambition, and the answer is action. So there are many solutions. One of the things that we as a species are good at, which made us a superpower, is that we can count. But it turns out we cannot count very well. right? And that's where what Jean was saying is exactly right. We need to, I think the solution is we need to learn how to count better, including by counting nature, whether it is through conservation or putting a value, a proper value on nature so that the dynamics of business will themselves be unleashed in trying to manage and capture that value. Let me give you a very simple example. That tree, right now, its value is negative. It is a cost. There is a gardener who has to take care of it. There is water you have to spend on it. Someone has to come and clean it. If I cut it down, suddenly it will become value, because then it will become wood. That's a very simple way of how you change things. We have been talking all morning. It's been wonderful being here. We've been talking a lot about the shift in economic power. You know, I'm here to tell you it's no longer the US, the greatest economic power on earth. It's not China, the greatest economic power on earth. I'm sorry, it's not Europe either. The greatest economic power on earth is still nature. I'm not making this up. We did a study in WWF on the economic value of water. The overall water economy is $58 trillion. $58 trillion. That is the economy of the US, plus the economy of China, plus the economy of Japan, plus the economy of Germany, and half the economy of France. Now, what I'm saying is, I understand this is easy to say, but the first shift has to be, we chose how to count things. And one of the most important things happening this year, one of them is what happens in 2 days. That is for you to decide. Another really important thing happening is that boring statisticians in the United Nations right now, this is happening now, are trying to figure out how to change how we count GDP. No one is even talking about it. What is decided in those negotiations will change how we think about global economy, how we think about businesses. That will unleash the power of business into itself.
Alors justement, le propos est très clair. Arnaud, GANGLOFF.
Thank you very much. That was very clear. Arnaud, GANGLOFF, how can businesses start moving in a direction to enable them to meet these challenges? You're a consultant. What are you saying to your businesses? On a micro level, to tie up with what Adil NAJAM has just said, we focus on guiding the action for businesses. We've developed a guide called the Positive Business Map to help businesses make these changes. We need to be humble enough to say that if it was easy to do, it would already have been done. So it's not by carrying on the same that we're going to make these change. First thing I want to say, Nick, follows on from what Marie-Pierre said, is to think about governance. We need to think about decision-making processes to make sure that all stakeholders are properly represented. I think that there are some business groups that have been very innovative who have invited someone to sit on their board to represent nature, to ensure that decisions are taken in the light of how they're going to impact nature. A second point, which Jean could talk about, is the way we relate to ecosystems. There's a major switch we need to make in the way we see the economy. We need to move from a model of cooperation on shared resources to a cooperation on what is common while maintaining a competitive market economy. So we need to think about the distinction between what we can do with shared resources and the market rules which will currently take precedence. There are changes to business models, and we could say a lot about that. But the third key point is that all of this will change because each one of us has a role to play, and there's a major issue around cultural transformation. Both leaders and staff members in businesses need to be encouraged to make this change. They need to have incentives. They need to see the role that they can play within their business in order to achieve this. Awareness raising, training, will that require additional budgets for businesses, from the smallest to the largest? Will these objectives cost monies for the bosses who want to do it? Does that require money, or is it just about managerial willpower? Yes, it does require money, but is this something, a that can be reassigned. There is money in businesses, and the question is how we allocate the money to these different issues. So, of course, resources are needed, but I think that it can be done. If we look at training, there are some areas where investment is required, but many businesses have understood that they will draw economic value if they invest in the environment and in people. Is there always positive return on investment? Yes, if we change our understanding of value. In a few minutes, we'll go back to the floor for questions, but I've got one more question for each of you. Jean-Arnaud, if we broaden our perspective, can we internationalize the idea of environmental impact? Can you give us an example? What we're talking about is internalizing negative externalities. It's a bit of a mouthful. CITIO was founded 30 years ago on the basis of a simple principle, which was to say that a business selling a product needs to bear the environmental impact of what it's producing. So it's a very simple issue of responsibility and accountability. So we started with packaging. We said you will pay just a small contribution to collect and sort through and recycle the waste that is produced from your products. So we've now got 80,000 businesses who pay 1.3 million and who are helping us to reduce waste, reuse waste, find new uses for it, and also to recycle that waste. And this is something that they then integrate into the price of the products that they sell. The product includes the price for putting in place the recycling bins and building the factories that are used to develop reuses of these packaging items. And this is a model that we're developing on an international level. The 800 million tons of plastic that are thrown into the oceans from the Earth, if we put in place a producer responsibility method, we would provide ongoing sustainable finance for recycling, reusing this waste, and this will push businesses to eco-design and new designs of their products. We want to discuss with the UN in order to push this idea. It is a real solution. I agree with what Marie-Pierre said. We shouldn't despair. It's a fairly concrete and tangible solution. It's quite effective. It's not perfect. Businesses aren't perfect, but it can be implemented. And a final point, it's another very concrete idea for the businesses who are here. It's not my idea. I'm not blowing my own trumpet. But in businesses, if we say that we no longer have a CFO, but a chief impact officer or a chief environmental officer, so the person who represents business performance is measuring things with not a financial metric, but an environmental metric. This will really shift businesses towards a combination of environmental impact. So ordinary citizens agree with that, don't they? Well, yes, I'd agree. Yes, our teams, our staff push us to do this. I'm part of a generation that come from the 20th century, but we're being pushing by our teams, and particularly younger members. Citizens as consumers is a bit of a different thing because they're very driven by the price they pay. Marie-Pierre de Vivendi, when we talk about business and companies, how can we convince them to work? What levers can be used to convince the people who are least convinced at the moment? Is there a toolkit? Sustainable development is a good example. It took us 35 years to move from sustainable development to corporate social development, to the European directive. This European directive requires them to publish their social and environmental indicators. It's going to go into law in 2025. So are we going to see this as a norm that's imposed by Europe, or are we going to be proactive and invest in our common future? Obviously, businesses are a very specific species of animal. They have their own rules for survival. and their approach to sustainable development is around risk management. When you talk about risk management, a financial business will understand it's something that is very tangible. When we talk about physical risks, droughts, floods, we read about them every day of the week when we read the newspapers or turn on the television. When we talk about lost assets, stranded assets, they become a real risk. There are regulatory risks with the risk of legal action. There are health and safety risks. Yes, we know the list, but is it not difficult for a small business leader to put that in place with their teams that don't necessarily have the training to do that? It will require training. It's okay for a big corporate behemoth, but it's difficult. Bosses are entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs prefer to choose things rather than have things imposed on them. So the question is whether we're going to continue to choose things or be rule takers instead. That's a great discussion. Adil, NAJAM, what are you expecting from businesses and multinationals in particular? Are the businesses that you talk to, listening to, where are things at in terms of the dialogue with multinationals, which I know you are discussing things with?
I think you make a very good distinction between large business and small business, because the dynamics of small business are different, and we should not be forcing the cost of change on the smallest, most vulnerable business. But once the big ones shift, that shift does seep through. Whether they listen to us or not, I don't know. Some do. For examples, this year there is the negotiation on plastics. It's again one of the most important negotiations happening. We as WWF co-host with other organizations something called the Business Coalition for a Plastic Treaty. And that is mostly because some companies see benefit in counting nature positively. So I think the change will come not by everyone, but by those forward movers who can see that value. The last very short thing that I hope businesses will think, multinationals, is it turns out we as a species are not very good at counting, and we are not also very good at keeping time. So the reporting requirement of every quarter, nature works to a different clock than the stock market. Now, that doesn't mean we don't respond to the stock market, but if the reporting is also on the long-term impacts in the same annual reports, then you as journalists, consumers who they do listen to, will start reacting differently.
Merci. Alors, chose promise, chose due.
Thank you very much. I promised this. You're going to continue debating, but are there any questions from the floor? I won't be able to take all questions, but do take the opportunity to go and see the different speakers after the session. We'll bring a microphone round to one or two. I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself very quickly and ask a very brief question.
I'm working in a small environmental association in Avignon, and I'm an agronomist as well. Allow me to chip in following what Mrs. Bailliencourt said. So to quantify biodiversity elements, to count them. When I listen to you, I'm under the impression that nothing has been done. But at INRA, scientists work on that. We quantified financially the amenities, hedges, streams, tributaries, the ground, the soil. So lots of things have been financially quantified, and public policies, should take that into account. And it's not done. Last remark. And this is in line with what you've said. A few weeks ago, insurance companies at a global level have drawn the attention to decision makers. When you don't take into account environmental dimensions, this will have a negative impact that will be taken into account by insurance companies. So, Mrs. de Bailliencourt, what do you think? You're right. At the Montaigne Institute, we've worked with agronomists, researchers, scientists on the report. We worked with farmers, with entrepreneurs. There is no common repository about the statistics, about the criteria to be followed. Unlike climate, we have different indicators. The ton per CO2, we don't have a biodiversity repository system. So it's important to get a global governance system. Of course, there will be some criteria, but we need to agree on what we measure, on what we gauge and quantify. But we haven't yet reached that objective. But it is of critical importance. Arnaud, we need to agree on what we measure. We need to agree on the metrics regarding biodiversity. So there are lots of studies and surveys, and they talk about public repositories. But it's important to look at the value and success in the company. So you talked about the integration of negative and positive externalities when it comes to gauging value. Things will change because when you consider the value creation of company, it has changed on the basis of those elements. Of course, we are in uncharted territory regarding the measurement system, but we will switch to another approach because it's important to look at value in a different fashion. When we change our perception about value, we change our modus operandi. The market rules should be applied, and we need to focus on shared resources. We need to develop an economy based on cooperation. We need to change the rules of the game, and this shouldn't be embedded in the appreciation of the corporate value. Thanks a lot. So, any other question? So, Madam, two last questions, and you will be given a mic very shortly. So you introduce yourself, and a short question, please. Good afternoon, Marine Gros. In a previous life, I was a consultant at the executive level. I've taken part in the drafting of the national strategy on biodiversity. I'd like to thank you for your comments and observations, especially the idea to move to a circular economy, from a linear economy to a circular economy. But there's something at stake. We have three pillars in the economy: natural, financial capital, and the capital of labor. And the different pillars, could be changed. So if we inject a biodiversity destruction, the systems won't react, or they will react positively, because this will create some value for the future and for biodiversity. Isn't there an interest in changing our economic rationale beyond the economic models? So, Jean Hornain, go ahead. You have 2 minutes. I'll try to provide an additional comment. If I had a magic wand, I would say there is no financial report on the one hand, or an extra financial report on the other. But at the end of the day, impact is key. So impact measurement should be embedded in the financial report. So, for example, if I destroy the planet, so I will pass on a big provision. Every provision will impact the accounts. The stock market price will be impacted. I'm not quite sure that I've answered your questions, but this is my contribution. Adil, maybe you want to add something to that.
A very short thing. I think what all of us are saying, none of all of this is possible. None of this is easy. If it was easy, we wouldn't have to sit here. I think there's a race. I've been talking of us as a species. We are a very smart species. I think there is a race between human knowledge and human wisdom. I think we have the knowledge. We have the information. We have the ideas to do this. I'm not sure we have the wisdom. I hope I'm wrong.
Merci, ça a le mérite d'être clair. Madame, nous vous écoutons.
It is crystal clear. Thanks a lot. I'm part of an association dealing with the rights of nature. So, human beings and nature, what type of modus vivendi or vivendi? Why not give rights to nature in order to improve biodiversity? There are some ecosystems. We know that rivers play a key role. Rivers play a key role for nature. So, what can we do for nature, in favor of nature, for nature? What can we do? Nature economics with a human sense. Adil, do you want to answer that?
That's a very, very good question. Point. One of the nicer things happening is there is a movement around the world to start thinking of legal rights for nature. A number of countries in their constitutions, Vietnam has done this, my own country, Pakistan, is thinking of doing this, is giving a legal status to the river. Right? Now, this is not a silly idea. It gives you, some countries have started talking of giving legal rights to forests. You can do that, and again, I think the poverty here is not of money. You had asked, whether there's enough money. There's never enough money, but there is always enough money. The poverty we have is of imagination, of thinking of nature differently than the thing out there and thinking of it as the thing we live in.
Merci beaucoup. Nous arrivons au terme de cette session. Peut-être en guise de conclusion.
Thanks a lot. Kathleen, maybe you can conclude. I mean, I didn't allow you to deliver your introduction, but over to you for your conclusion. So everybody insisted on putting value to nature. That's pivotal as an economist. It's important, to compute things in a meaningful way. There's another point that we haven't yet addressed. Public policies, beyond the role of companies and businesses, it's important to have a strong public policy. It's not easy. In France, we have the zero net artificialization. It doesn't work. Localities are very reluctant. Municipalities are reluctant. There are some tax-related issues. Tax system is not adapted. Lots of problems with the public policy that haven't been sorted out. But you need to consider the budget. There are lots of budget constraints. Of course, political will is pivotal. So we can give them a big round of applause. And of course, you can continue to talk. So you can pop out of the tent on the left or on the right. Thanks a lot, for all of you in the room. Thanks a lot for all those who followed us online. So we will have a session in a few minutes' time, another session in a few minutes' time. Thanks a lot.